Okay, brothers and sisters, well, this is going to be Gideon chapter 8. We're going to kind of close her out here with our Gideon study. Let's read the first 9 verses here. Later on, the descendants of Ephraim spoke to Gideon. They argued vehemently, "What are you doing to us? You never called us, but you went out to fight Midian." "What have I accomplished compared to you?" he responded. "Isn't what's left from Ephraim's harvest better than the best vintage of Abiezer?" If you remember, that's the descending clan of Gideon. It was this Abiezer out of the tribe of Manasseh. "God gave Oreb and Zeeb, the leaders of Midian, into your control. What was I able to do compared to you?" When he said this, their anger calmed down. Meanwhile, Gideon and the 300 soldiers that came with him to the Jordan, exhausted but continuing in their pursuit, he told the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the soldiers who are following behind me. They are tired, and I'm pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." Okay, so these were princes up here, or leaders, and now we got the kings that he's pursuing. Okay, so Gideon responded, "Okay, first," but the officials of Succoth replied, "Do you have Zebah and Zalmunna in custody already, so that we should give you food to your army?" So they didn't believe Gideon was going to be able to beat them. So Gideon responded, "Okay then, but when the Lord has turned over Zebah and Zalmunna into my control, I'm going to whip you with the thorns and briars from the desert." Then he left and went to Penuel and asked the same thing of them. But the men of Penuel responded the same way the men of Succoth did. So he responded the same way to the men of Penuel. "When I come back safely, I'm going to tear down this tower." Now let's stop right there. So I'm not going to read. I had a commentary I was going by. Let me just strike that for the purposes of this video. But it's important to see here that these are all tribes of Israel that are complaining. So Ephraim is the tribe, and we'll see a picture here in a moment. I think it was up northeast, I want to say, from the place where this was occurring. I think that's right. We'll see it on the map. But they're complaining that they didn't get to come into this deliverance fight. Were never even invited to it when Gideon blew the horn calling for a gathering for war. Okay, so they're mad because of that. And Gideon fluffed them up and said, "Well, I gave you Oreb and Zeeb, the princes of Midian, or the leaders of Midian, into your control," and they, of course, put him to death. So that calmed them down. And then Gideon's chasing the kings, Zebah and Zalmunna of Midian. And first the men of Succoth, which is the tribe of Gad, said, "You don't have them in your custody, so I'm giving you no food, buddy." And if you just get the mental image, here comes the 300 from behind Gideon. You remember the dogs, so I'm sure they weren't looking like the greatest war machine they've ever seen, chasing, we'll find out here, it was chasing 15,000 men that were with Zebah and Zalmunna. So it's not as implausible, that response, as what it might seem on the get-go. And then the same thing happened with the men of Penuel, who were from the tribe of Judah. They said, "Well, you don't have Zebah and Zalmunna, we're not going to help you out either." Okay, so let's keep reading down with that context. Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Kakor along with their armies, about 15,000 men who survived from the entire army of the group from the east, since 120,000 swordmen had fallen already. So there you get the 135,000 if you look at who had died already, with only 300 guys chasing them, and then 15,000 remained. Gideon went up by caravan route east of Noba and Jogbaha and attacked their encampment while they were off guard. When Zebah and Zalmunna escaped, he pursued them, captured those two kings of Midian, and threw the entire army into panic. Then Joash, his son Gideon, returned from the battle along the Heres ascent. He caught a young man from Succoth and interrogated him. He wrote out for Gideon a list of the 77 officials of Succoth, including its elders. Now I'm sure there's probably a little bit of meaning in that 77 there, including its elders. Then Gideon approached the men of Succoth and announced, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. You criticized me about them when you said, 'Do you have Zebah and Zalmunna in custody so that we should give you food to your weary army?' So he took the elders of the city and disciplined the men of Succoth with thorns and briars from the desert." And I guess this was a real torturous application, according to the one commentary I read. They would take this and they would have heavy sleds, I think they called them, with these briars underneath, and they would rake them across the people. It was a very serious kind of a deal. Okay, and so he then demolished the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. So see what's going on here. I mean, Gideon now killed all the men in another Israeli tribe's town. These are the men from Judah. So this is a serious deal. And afterwards he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What were the men like whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, "Like you, each one like the son of a king." And Gideon replied, "They were my brothers, son from my own mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I wouldn't be killing you." Okay, and then he told his firstborn son Jether, "Get up and kill them," but he was afraid since he was only a youngster. Then Zebah and Zalmunna responded, "Get up and attack us yourself, since a man's valor is only as good as the man himself." So Gideon got up and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took away the crescent-shaped necklaces that adorned the necks of their camels. Okay, so there's a few different things headed in here. First off, this whole idea of why is he asking about who Zebah and Zalmunna had killed from before at Tabor? Well, this comes back to, and I guess I got it here in the commentary, the kings of Midian must be reckoned with as they confessed themselves guilty of murder. Gideon acted as the avenger of blood, being the next of kin to the person slain. And so he's following Levitical or Mosaic law here, that if somebody dies, remember, under the Mosaic law, is killed, murdered, that the next of kin was supposed to go avenge the death. And so somewhere along the way, Gideon's brothers from the same mother, which was important because polygamy was rampant in here. So very close, his brothers were killed by the Zebah and Zalmunna, and now this slaying is Gideon extracting revenge for that. And what Gideon was trying to do is get his first son, the firstborn Jether, to go kill these two as the revenge. And in doing so, I read in another commentary that this was trying to set his son up to be equal in stature, if not greater than Zebah and Zalmunna, because he's the one having them execute him. But the kid was too young. He was afraid, as he was only a youngster, and so Gideon did it. Now we get to the crescent-shaped moons, and I was digging into that. Crescent-shaped ornaments of gold and silver, still common, used to decorate animals. They gave a reference here in Isaiah as well. And Muhammad was found a slain camel with these and a string of emeralds. And so it was reminding me, we had some of that picturing, and we're going to take a look in a moment, where the moon was thought to symbolize Semiramis, after she died, she was represented as the Queen of Heaven and represented with the moon. And could that be that we're looking at the Amalekites and the Midianites that were coming out of that area in Saudi Arabia, where you've got today, the Arabic people believing in Islam, and their symbol is a crescent moon. Isn't much of a stretch there to say, is that crescent moon of Islam a picture of Semiramis from the ancient pagan religions? And I would say it's probably the case. So let me pop up here. First, let's take a look at where all this action's going on. So originally it started up in the Jezreel Valley, where the first battle happened, the 300 against the 135,000, if you remember that. And then they fled, and then we ran into the town Succoth, which this doesn't have it in Gad, but it supposedly was in Gad. And then they go further south, and they have a tribe. I'm not seeing Penuel on this map, but that's supposedly of Judah. And so this action's happening right down here at the border. They must have run along the river, and we're trying to cross back toward home at some point in here. The fleeing Midianites were, because remember, the Midianites were down here, where just east and south of where the Moabites and the Edomites were. And so that all kind of makes sense. They were fleeing toward home, and Gideon was chasing them down. Okay, now let's go take a look at one other interesting thing. We're looking at the kings Zeba and Zalmunna, and I want to just point one other thing out. We see in the battles and in the Bible here, we looked at a whole bunch of passages at the beginning of Judges chapter 6, and it was pointing toward the Amorites, which when we looked were as tall as and likened to cedars and as strong as the oaks, right? You remember that? And so, there were giants in the land, and we saw the children of Anak, which were also giants that were in this land and area, and we then saw now the invading Amalekites and Midianites. They were together in this deal. So we looked at giants and giantism, and here you can see, like, I guess these would be spearheads, 4 or 5 times bigger than this guy's hand. So obviously a giant is throwing something like this, and you see giant footprints have been found around the world. This is actually I think this is technically still a sandstone of some sort, but it's a super hard sandstone this one's in. But you can see how big some of these critters must have been. But then you also get these elongated skulls, and this is the Paracas skulls of South America. And what the comparison's doing here is this here happens to be Nefertiti, and here's a bigger shot of Nefertiti here, and you can see obviously the artist was going for anatomically correct. Now I don't know her height in terms of stature, but you can see how Nefertiti was also in pictographs or the pictures in the Egyptian tombs and all that, with the elongated skulls. And I could show you a whole bunch of these pictures with elongated skulls out of Egypt. And what I want to tie together here is, if you do this study, and I had this down, I think it was in the Who's Amalek, I showed you some archaeological evidence article pointing to the fact that what really happened here was when Moses was bringing the children of Israel out after the crossing of the Red Sea, and they did their time at Mount Sinai. The first battle, though, they ran into was a battle with the Amalekites, and let's see if we can pop that up here quick. Bam. And you can see the battle was right by Mount Sinai, at Rephidim, and in Exodus 17, verse 8, that's where Amalek and the Amalekites attacked Moses and the children of Israel. And the point I want to make with this is the archaeological evidence suggested that after they were defeated there, Amalek was defeated there, not very long afterwards, because the Egyptian army had drowned in the Gulf of Aqaba. There was no one there to defend Egypt, and there's tons of archaeological evidence that another group from Saudi Arabia area, now they're called in history the Hyksos, I think it is, but they're the Amalekites. And go ahead and dig that up. You'll see that's the way people have it. And the archaeological evidence was a pillar that told the story of the Amalekites coming into the land of Egypt. And so why I wanted to point to this is the Amalekites, and we were looking at kings here, the Midianites, the Amalekites. I'm going to suggest that one of the distinguishing features of royalty among the Amalekites probably was this distended skull. Now remember, these were talked about as the product of fallen angels mating with human women, and I think in the first generation of that, we see these distinguishing features here that would suggest that this is the genetic tampering part, and now we see that the Amalekites were the ones that went into Egypt and reigned during, I think it was the 13th and 12th dynasty, and Nefertiti here is an example of royalty in that era right after the Israelites left. This is like the next dynasty that comes in, her and her husband. And so it's really neat how the archaeology supports this interpretation of the Bible and what we're seeing. And again, these skulls, these elongated skulls, the formation of the skull is wrong to be a human. There's something about the parietal plate. The people that are into the study recognize that the formation of the skull suggests non-human DNA. And so it just kind of wraps these things together. Why are the Israelites so impressed with the surrounding people? Well, they were probably intellectually superior. Their stature was superior. And if you think about it, when the Israelites finally said that they wanted their own king and they picked Saul, if you remember, they wanted a king just like the surrounding peoples had kings. In the description of Saul in your Bible, he was a head and shoulder taller than any of the rest of them, and he had ruddy good looks or something like that. They were picking somebody from the tribes of Israel that was probably as close as they could get to these tall in stature kings that were of the surrounding tribes. So I just think it's really cool. So let's go back and finish up what we're doing here and close her out. So 22 to the end. Then the men of Israel asked Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandsons, because you have delivered us from Midian's domination." But Gideon told them, "I won't rule over you, or my son won't rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Now that's the way it was supposed to be during the, God didn't want them to have a king other than himself. And so when they chose Saul eventually, that was a sin. But Gideon also added, "I'd like to ask that each of you give me a ring from his war booty," because the Ishmaelites, the Midianites, had been wearing gold rings. And they responded, "We'll be happy to give them." So they laid out a garment, and each of them contributed a ring from his booty. The weight of the rings he had asked for were 1,700 gold coins, not counting the crescent-shaped necklaces, pendants, and purple garments worn by the Midianite kings, and also not counting the bands adorning the necks of the camels. Okay, Gideon crafted booty into an ephod and enshrined it in his home town of Ophrah. Now I looked into this. I guess according to the Mosaic law, the priests were supposed to use the ephod to get direction from the Lord in terms of making decisions. I guess during the times of the judges that this wasn't an abomination for Gideon to make an ephod if he was a judge of the people. But you see, there's going to be a problem coming. Then all of Israel committed spiritual adultery with it there and became a snare for Gideon and his household because they were worshiping it. They enshrined it in his hometown of Ophrah, and they were worshiping to it. Midian remained subjugate to the Israelis. They didn't so much as raise their heads anymore, so the land was peaceful for 40 years during the lifetime of Gideon. Now again, 40 is an interesting number because it represents a trial is in process. Afterwards, Joash's son Jerubbaal went home and retired. Gideon raised 70 sons as his direct descendants since he had many wives. Well, now we see Gideon is sinning because he's taking multiple wives. His mistress in Shechem bore him a son whom he named Abimelech. Later, Joash's son Gideon died at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash at Ophrah, which belonged to the descendants of Abiezer. Later on, as soon as Gideon was dead, the Israelis again committed spiritual adultery with various Canaanite deities and appointed Baal-berith to be their god. The Israelis did not remember the Lord God, who continually delivered them from the domination of their enemies, who surrounded them on every side. And they showed no gracious love to the house of Jerubbaal, also known as Gideon, despite all the good that he had done for Israel. So you can see how during the last part of Gideon's life, the 40 years, was a trial to see what the Israelis would do. Would they stay with God? And no, we see right away they started worshiping the ephod, and then Gideon himself took many wives, which was also the downfall of Solomon, and you could argue David with Bathsheba and the like. And then you see he raised 70 sons with all these wives, and right after he dies, you know, the hand of God stops holding back the evil, and they're right back into the problem they originally had with worshiping false gods. So that's our Gideon study. So I guess drop me some notes what you think down below. I was fired up by Gideon. I think this is a great study. So God bless you, saints, and Lord willing, we'll see you in the next one.